I think this is a cosmic event. And I think that what's happening in Jesus in this moment is that he sees these people that he deeply loves suffering because of sin. He also knows clearly and deeply what it will cost him to fix it.
This is the Land and the Bible podcast. Welcome to the Land and the Bible podcast. Is it the Land and the Bible, the Land and the Bible podcast,
or is the Land and Bible, or
the land? It's the Land and the Bible podcast.
Awesome.
So, my name's Josh, and
I'm Jameson.
And so, we've known each other for a while. We'll get a little bit of the backstory on why we're here.
I guess it goes back 8 or 10 years. I met you guys on a trip to Cambodia, trying to raise money for a group out there. And I was there to kind of learn what they were doing. And I was like, these guys make good videos. Let's try to get them to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And then I was operating school in Bethlehem.
Yeah.
You guys came out. We shot video for that. It was awesome. We still use it. And just recently, as you know, we still use all that. And then, it's kind of things went from there, I guess.
Yeah. So, we had been talking. We're like, hey, we should do something together because you have a lot of great stories. And every time we're together, we always sit down and we just end up talking for hours and hours about a lot of the things that we're going to talk about here, which is the land and the Bible.
And how they interact.
So give us a little bit of background about yourself and how you're coming at this text and what makes this unique.
Yeah, so basically how my story kind of goes, a very just brief encapsulated version of it, is I went to a Bible school in Tennessee, college, and graduated from there in 1997, to date myself a little bit. And I graduated in May of that year. And by August of that year, I had accepted a position as a volunteer teacher at a Christian school in East Jerusalem. So, as a 23-year-old, I go out to Jerusalem to live there. And I thought I was going out for a 1-year stint, and got there and felt like I was supposed to stay. Like I was supposed to help those kids in that community there. And so I did, and it ended up being a 24-year stint. And over the course of that time, those 24 years, I met my wife there. She's actually a Texas girl, but she came out to do similar work to what I was doing. We met at a Bible study, and
as the story goes.
Yeah, as the story goes. And I always kind of joke about that and say, if a tall, blonde, beautiful Texas girl walks into your Bible study in East Jerusalem, you should seize the moment, and that's pretty well how it went down. I met her and I was like, yes, I want that. And she was amenable. So we got married a couple of years later. In the midst of all that, I was working on my master's degree, which is in Middle Eastern cultures and religions. And that's a part of what I bring to this, in that I got to study. It's just really a blessing of God. I got to study with some really remarkable, brilliant people, in regards to Middle Eastern religion. So that would be Judaism and Islam and culture there. Of course, I got to live in the culture, so I got to learn it that way also. And then I got to take classes in historical geography of the Bible, in an organized way. And then I got to just spend 24 years driving around the country, popping into places and just sort of being like, oh, well, this is where David and Goliath fought. Let's read the story. Oh, this is where, whatever, name the place. And kind of read it in context. And over time doing that, both doing organized study and sort of personal study and just exploration, you begin to sort of network things together in your head, basically I sort of have the map of the Bible is up there because that's the geography I drove around in and walked around in for 24 years, and, would read the stories, in context of where I was and delve into what happened there. And I mean, something you need to know about Israel to just understand it at all is that it's a land of extreme contrasts. So, just arriving from the airport, you land in Tel Aviv, which is at sea level, obviously it's by the sea. And then you drive up to Jerusalem, which is a little bit less than 3,000 feet above sea level. So you go up 3,000 feet. And it's different. You go from a warm, a little bit humid coastal climate up to arid and significantly colder in the winter, just by being 3,000 feet higher. Then you carry on another 15 miles or so, and you drop down to 1,300 feet below sea level in Jericho. And now it's hot and tropical. No, it's not tropical, but it's tropical heat and desert. And they can grow, bananas and oranges down there. Whereas in Jerusalem, you can't, so there's just intense geographic variation, which leads to variation in, rainfall totals and temperatures and what you can grow, what you can't. And all of that plays into the stories. Sometimes it's little, really tiny details. For instance, when Jesus goes into Jericho, it says that Zacchaeus climbed a sycamore tree. Well, okay, so what? Well, actually, it's really interesting because sycamore trees only grow if you take the whole map of the country and put about 3 dots on it, and that would be places where sycamore trees grow because they need heat and water. And generally speaking, in Israel, when you're in low places, it's really hot, but it's also desert, so there's not water. But in Jericho, because there's springs, you get lots of groundwater, then they can grow. And it just happens to be one of the spots, right? So you have all these little details that kind of pop when you've been there. And
those are things that when you're reading the text, you almost gloss over them.
Yeah,
but then when you're with you, they become central.
Well, I hope so. With a certain amount of knowledge, then they do. And for me, they're very faith affirming because it's a little detail, but that couldn't have been added, hundreds of years later by someone monkeying around the text. They wouldn't have known that.
Yeah.
And even just the routes that people take when they travel, maybe it's, it says David went from Bethlehem to, this cliff overlooking the valley of Elah. Well, that ridgeline runs perfectly in a straight line. That's not hard,
right.
When you go there. And so you could see how a teenage boy could manage that, know, and his father would let him do it. So there's just lots of details. Yeah. When you've been there, they pop out. They're faith affirming. Sometimes they add something to the story that wasn't obvious until you'd seen that. And also culture, helps you understand what's going on sometimes. So all of that are what I hope happens over the course of these podcasts is that we can sort of bring all that to bear on some of the Bible stories. And I mean, it's not like it's going to change the gospel. Okay. You know the gospel, you know who Jesus is and you know what he did for you. But some of those stories really shine when you add just a detail or two to them, that hopefully we can bring out. So I guess that's the goal.
That's awesome. Well, that's great. So what are we talking about today? We're going to kick off today with the beginning of Passion Week, right?
Yeah. So what we're going to be doing with this first series of podcasts is just delving into Passion Week, the week that Jesus showed up in Jerusalem, eventually resulting in his crucifixion and resurrection. So we're just going to delve into that week. We'll organize the episodes around the places. Okay, so the Mount of Olives, the temple, the upper room, the Garden of Gethsemane, Golgotha, the tomb, like that. We'll organize around the places, sort of take those scenes, if you would, like in a play where you sort of have, here's the set, and then you have an act on that set, and then you change the set or the scenery, and then you have an act that's played out on that stage, and so we're going to sort of organize it that way. We're going to go sort of chronologically through. Now, some of the places appear more than once. So for instance, the Mount of Olives, you have Jesus coming into Jerusalem on a donkey, the triumphal entry, and then you have him coming back out of Jerusalem, where you give the Olivet Discourse. So you've got him there twice. So we'll kind of have to pick a little bit how we focus, but we'll hit the locations, and then we're also going to look at the players. Like that week played out, and you have some really big personalities that are now really archetypes in our culture, Judas and Pontius Pilate and all these kind of people that are, that's like a sort of a role now. I mean, it's defined, right? Anyone who's a traitor now is Judas, and anyone who's kind of a weak sellout, for some level of benefit is, you're like Pontius Pilate, so those have become almost tropes. They become, iconic sort of things in our culture. Well, we want to look at some of those characters also, and then we want to see what the Lord is doing and all of that, and what we can learn from it. So, and what we'd like to do, I think, with each of the episodes is take a few minutes to be, sort of history, geography nerds, but then branch that over into the story and look at, well, how does that apply to us? What sort of some personal level devotional content that I can pull out of that too. So I think that's kind of where we want to go.
Awesome. So let's get started. So this first one, we're talking about the death of Lazarus.
Yeah. Okay. So it's kind of funny because we said we're doing Passion Week,
right?
And then we're going to start with something that was not actually in Passion Week. It was actually a few weeks before. But I feel like you have to set the stage, and the background for Jesus's arrival in Jerusalem is the event in Bethany a few weeks prior.
Okay.
That's what raises the level of tension and drama in Jerusalem. That's when he comes into Jerusalem, he's coming and he's walking right into a place. It's like a powder keg.
Gotcha.
And what happens in John 11 with the raising of Lazarus is what really, really sets that up. And so I think we start there.
Gotcha. So this is what happens before the title sequence. This is the opening scene.
It's the prequel.
Yeah, it comes, and then the title sequence, and then Passion Week. If this was a film.
Exactly.
Okay, I got it.
Exactly.
I'm there. So where is Bethany?
So Bethany is about 1.5 miles
okay.
from the old city of Jerusalem.
Okay.
So the way Jerusalem works is it sits on a series of hills. And Mount Moriah, which is where the temple sat, is a mountain. It is a hill, but it's actually lower than the surrounding hills. So you have the hill that is now called Mount Zion is above it, higher to the west. And the Mount of Olives is above the Temple Mount to the east.
Mm-hmm.
And Bethany is just on the backside of the Mount of Olives.
Okay.
So if you're in Bethany, to get to Jerusalem, you kind of come over the top of the Mount of Olives. You drop down into what's called the Kidron Valley. The valley separates Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives.
Mm-hmm.
You drop down into that valley, and then you kind of come up into the city. And Bethany has been kind of like a Jerusalem neighborhood,
mm-hmm.
if you would, a bedroom community for Jerusalem, literally going back 2,000 years. It was always sort of an outlying village of Jerusalem, which is basically what it still is till this day. So that's kind of how that worked. And what would happen is this. So if you were a religious Jew, you had to come to Jerusalem for the religious sort of festival holidays. Okay. The headliners being Sukkot, which we call Feast of Tabernacles, and Pesach, which we call Passover. Okay. So you pretty well had to come for those things, right? If you were able-bodied and capable. And Jesus, as a Jew who's living out the Torah, the law of Moses perfectly, that's his purpose, is to come and fulfill the law and be innocent but be punished, right, to pay for our sins. Then he has to come. He has to come because he's able-bodied and capable. So Jesus would come and go from Jerusalem on a regular basis. Now, he's a Galilean. He's not from Judea or the area around Jerusalem. He's from the Galilee. He's from the north. And he would, his home base is Capernaum. Matthew says that he lived in Capernaum during his ministry years.
And that's how far away?
I think about 70 miles.
Okay.
So, on foot, and it's a few days.
Yeah.
So he'd come walking. They would walk down the Jordan River Valley,
mm-hmm.
which is below sea level the whole way.
Yep.
It's hot down there. They'd get to Jericho, which is a desert oasis city. They would take a right-hand turn and climb about 4,000 or 5,000 feet up the mountains to Jerusalem. About 4,000 feet, I guess.
Yeah.
So big sort of climb there at the end. And that's why the Bible always says coming up to Jerusalem, because you're climbing. You get there and you're sort of in the holy city. So, but anyway, Bethany is just outside. All these thousands of people would flood into the city for the holidays, right? Some historians estimate as many as 2 million people may have come for Passover most years. That's probably a highball estimate, but I think it's safe to say 300 to 500,000 people came every year. And so you start thinking about a city the size of Jerusalem with the typical population every day was, maybe 20,000 people or so. Now 500,000 people are going to flood in. That's just crowded, and if you've been there, it's not that big.
Yeah.
And so what Jesus did was really smart. he had friends. He has Mary, Martha, Lazarus, who lived just over the hill. A 1.5 mile walk for those guys that's nothing. That's before breakfast every day, So just over the hill, and he could stay there with them and come and go. And so Bethany is Jesus's Jerusalem base, if you would. It's where he comes and goes from. He deeply loves Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, because it's very clear in the text.
Mm-hmm.
He deeply loves them. And so he uses that to sort of avoid the crowds a little bit. He can get in Jerusalem, teach, provoke, tear up the temple, and run out the workers, whatever he's doing in Jerusalem. He can get in there, do that, and then kind of escape a little bit.
Okay.
Being a little bit less crowded place in the evening, and then go back in and do it the next day. So that's kind of his flow during those times when he's in Jerusalem.
That makes a lot of sense. Is that where he's going in a lot of these times when he has crowds and different things happen and he has to retreat?
Yeah, so for sure. So for instance, later in the Passion Week, he goes in the city, he teaches and sort of debates in the temple, and then he's leaving. This is when we get the whole interaction where Jesus, the disciples look back at the temple. They're like, wow, the temple's great. And he says, not one stone will be left on another. And you get sort of the Olivet discourse where he teaches on the Mount of Olives about the end times. All of that is as he's leaving Jerusalem on his way to Bethany, on the face of the Mount of Olives, looking back at the city. And so you sort of get that, again, that come and go interaction, always there. And so as you open this story, what has happened is Jesus has a relationship with these people. He's at the end of his ministry. So he's, 3 years in. He's probably come and gone from their home 6 or 7 times at least. He loves them. They love him. There's a deep relationship. And Lazarus is sick. But by now, much farther into the ministry, Jesus is a known figure. He's not bursting on the scenes anymore. It's sort of remote Galilean province. He's a known figure. The Jerusalem sort of priestly aristocracy, the bad guys, the scribes and the priests, the Bible often calls them, they're making a lot of money by keeping a lid on things and sort of managing the Jewish people for the Romans. They're not good guys, and they do not want to lose their power or their money. And they can't stand him. Okay. They just can't stand him. And so they're already looking for ways to kill him. That becomes quite clear in the text as you read it. And so Jesus knows if he goes that close to Jerusalem and does something big, then that's going to be the end, really. That they can't tolerate that. And so
that sets the stage for what we're.
Yeah, exactly, for where we're going. And so what happens is this in the text. It says at the beginning of chapter 11 in John, it says a man was sick, Lazarus from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. And Mary was the one who anointed. Okay, so he's sick and they send for Jesus. And Jesus is staying away from the city right now because you know what's going on. And he knows if he goes there, it's going to be difficult. And you have this sort of conversation where Jesus says, so they send a message. When Jesus heard it, he said, the sickness will not end in death, but it is for the glory of God. So the Son of God may be glorified through it. And it says, now Jesus loved Martha, her sister, and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Then after that, he said to the disciples, let's go to Judea. So he loved them, so he lingers, which allows, of course, that results in Lazarus' death.
Right.
And he's ready to go. And you have this funny thing. He says, like, okay, now it's time to go to Jerusalem. And the disciples are like, whoa, that's going to be dangerous. I don't like you up there. And he says, no, we're going to go. And then Thomas, poor Thomas, he only gets quoted 2 or 3 times in the text, and it's always sort of this sort of grumpy Eeyore. Well, I don't know, I'll believe it when I see it. I hope there was more to his character than that. I'm sure there was, or Jesus wouldn't have recruited him. But yeah, he gets quoted here, and his quote is that Thomas said to the fellow disciples, "Let's go that we may die with him." Let's go up there and get killed with him. Let's go. So, he's this sort of grumpy comment. Oh, here we go. This is not going to be good. And they head up to Bethany, just outside of Jerusalem, the headquarters, if you would, of really the evil, the bad guys, So he's right at their doorstep. He gets there, and of course, Lazarus is dead. and you have this really fascinating moment. There's a lot of, the whole story is fascinating, really, to be from start to finish. And there's things that you could focus on. There's too many things that you could focus on, really. One of the things that's really cool is what happens when he gets there. So we have this stereotype regarding Mary and Martha, that, Martha is the busybody who does stuff.
Yeah.
And Mary is the one that sort of sits at Jesus's feet and, looks longingly at him. And,
right.
so that's kind of their personalities. And we vilify Martha a little bit, but, she's also trying to get things done because she loves him. It's not that she doesn't want to be around him. She wants, she's someone, to use sort of the love language thing, that, her love
Acts
language is service. She just wants to do stuff for him,
Right.
And, and he has to, let her know, like, hey, you could just kind of hang out too. Like, oh, okay. So that's there, but she loves him too, and she runs out because she is the active one. She hears Jesus coming and she runs out and she says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Yet even now, I know whatever you ask of God, God will give you. So she has this wonderful faith. And but again, she's the proactive one. Jesus is coming. She's going to run out there and talk to him.
Right.
And she says, if you'd have been here, he wouldn't have died. And Jesus tells her, hey, your brother's going to rise again. All right. And of course, she thinks like, well, yeah, he's going to rise again, like in the afterlife, later,
Yep.
She thinks this is just one of these sort of platitudes that you tell people at a funeral, like, oh, you'll see him again, and she's like, yeah, I know, I get it. But he means, more than that. And so he says to her, I'm the resurrection and life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And she's like, yes, I believe. And so he greets her and he ministers to her with truth, and then he kind of rolled down, and he meets with Martha, and he said, meets with Mary. It says the Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw that Mary got up quickly and went out. So they followed her, supposing, that she was going to go to the tomb and cry. And so then she sees Jesus and she says the same thing. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So it's a grieving sister says the same thing, but Jesus' response is very different. It says, when Jesus saw her crying and the Jews who had come with her crying, he was angry. Okay, so I'm reading a CSB translation.
Okay.
Most translations will say something like, full of emotion, or, overcome with whatever. There'll be something that's telling you that Jesus had a lot of emotion. I'm actually, kind of proud of the guys at CSB for translating it accurately, because what the word really means in Greek is it implies it's the word that's used for an animal, let's say like a bull, when they're angry and they're like snorting.
Oh, wow.
With anger and aggression, like, okay.
Yeah.
So he's not a little bit angry. He's really angry. He's intensely angry. And well, that kind of begs a question, but let's and we're going to answer that question, but let's sort of go on from there. And then it says, come and see. And then it says, you have the famous sort of verse where it says, Jesus wept. So Jesus responds to Mary very differently than he responds to Martha. Martha, he's like, hey, let me tell you, it's going to be all right. And that's what she needs. Mary, he sees her, and he just has this emotional response. He's angry, he's crying, and we always think of Jesus, sometimes from movies and artistic renditions of who Jesus is, as this very austere, controlled, and he was in control. Like he had the capacity to be angry and to be sad and not sin. Not, we get angry and get sad and do stupid stuff, like he had the capacity to feel that emotion and be motivated by that emotion, but to harness it in a right way, which I think is a big deal. But you have this eruption of emotion with him, the Greek is clear. He's like snorting and he's weeping. The word is wept. It's not like, and he teared a little, So it's this, and he knows he's going to raise Lazarus, but still there's just this empathetic moment of like, he sees what they're going through. And And there's just a deep, deep well response to that, which I think is actually really cool, because we're all going to deal with people in our lives who are in those kind of positions where they're grieving, they're hurt, whatever. And it kind of shows you that Jesus was able to deal with different people in different ways. Martha needed to hear it was okay. He did that. Mary needs somebody to cry with her. And he is open-hearted enough to get in there and feel with her, and cry with her. So that's going on. And then they progress to the tomb. And it says, so the Jews are seeing all this, and they said they could see how he loved him, but some of them said, couldn't he who opened the blind man's eyes also kept this man from dying? So you've got these people in the crowd. Some are like, wow, look how much he loved Lazarus. And then you've always got, the critics. They're like, well, we just got here on time. This wouldn't happen. And so that's all.
Is all this taking place in the same place?
Yeah. Well, so the tombs would have been just outside of town, right? Because in Jewish culture and in law, tombs and dead people are unclean. So you wouldn't have that in town. You would have to. So they're progressing from the village, from the town, from the house out. And it probably wasn't that far. Yeah. Maybe a 5-10 minute walk out to the burial site.
Gotcha.
So this is sort of in motion, right? So Jesus is coming into the city. He's coming up the hill to Bethany. He gets there, interacts with them, gets to the house where Mary is. Now they're going out to the tomb. And then again, in verse 39, it says, then Jesus, angry in himself again, came to the tomb. It was a cave and a stone was lying against it. Remove the stone, he said. So this is something, and this is what I actually really want to focus in on with all of this.
Yeah.
We only have 2 times in the New Testament where the Bible clearly states that Jesus is angry. Okay? We have one where he heals the man with the withered hand in the synagogue. And he's angry because the scribes and the priests care more about like the law and the rule than helping the man. And it says in that, he says that he's angry and sorrowful. It's in Mark when that takes place. And so that's, to me, if something's making Jesus angry, this guy who has great patience and great love and a deep well of kindness, like if he's getting angry and real angry, where he's like snorting and crying and like, okay, this is something that we maybe should key in on. Mm-hmm. Like we should really think about and kind of figure out why. So in the Mark text, he's angry at these religious officials because they should know better. They represent God on earth. They're reading the scriptures and then telling the people this is what the Lord would want, and they're communicating to the people that God cares more about the letter of the law and these rules and the humans, and that I think that angers him that they would misrepresent him in that way, and also just the way that they're using and abusing this human. Why is Jesus angry at the tomb? And to me, I think it is this. I think this is a cosmic event. Okay, I think that Jesus, and it's hard for us to wrap our heads around, but somehow he embodies a fully human nature and a fully God nature at the same time. And as God, as a member of the Godhead, he would have been present when humans were created. And he would know that they were never meant to die and suffer like this. And I think that what's happening in Jesus in this moment is that he sees these people that he deeply loves suffering because of sin and death that was never meant to be something they suffered through. He deeply loves them. He hates what they're going through. He also knows clearly and deeply what it will cost him to fix it. That if like, I don't want my people to suffer death. I don't want my people to suffer at the hands of sin. To stop it, it means that cross. And if I do this, they will kill me the next time I come to Jerusalem. Like, I think he knows if I do this, it's absolutely fully game on. I mean, he knew from the start that he was going to be, and this gets into a question of just how omniscient was Jesus, or how much of his God nature did he bring with him into a body as a human, and that's a huge element of debate. For me, I think Jesus was clearly not omniscient on earth because the Bible tells us he grew in knowledge. You can't grow in knowledge if you know everything. So I think he clearly was not omniscient on earth.
Right.
And I don't think he was omnipresent while he was on earth. I don't think he was in 8 places at the same time or whatever. I think somehow he chose to limit, this is like a dad wrestling with his kids. You don't go full on, you kind of, put one hand behind your back and I think he chose to limit himself so that he could also have a truly human experience and show us the right way to do it. So I think he knew he had to die on a cross. And I think he knew from the scripture it had to be at a Passover, but maybe he didn't necessarily know it had to be at this Passover, but he knows if he does this, it is. I just think he understands that if I do this, it's on. This battle with sin and death that's going to result in my death. If I do this, it's game on. And he looks at it and he's like, yeah, and that's worth it. And he goes to the tomb and he's angry. You got to think, this is not, you see later in the garden where Jesus is praying and he's like, Father, please, if there gets another way. He's praying like we pray, like, God, please heal this person. But if you don't, help me, this, because we don't get to be commanding, we don't have that authority necessarily. But he did. And the tomb of Lazarus, he is not, these are not long, flowery, Lord, please, if you would prayers. It's a command, remove the stone. Like he is there in full force, full of all that. Get the stone out of here. And, they're kind of like, hey, it's been 4 days. He stinks. And he's like, yeah, move the stone. He says, didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So he removed the stone. And then he says, Father, I thank you that you heard me. I know you always hear me, but because of the crowd standing here, I said this so that they may believe you sent me. So in other words, the whole prayer isn't actually, he's like, hey, God, I'm kind of praying, but really I'm just saying things that they'll hear him. And at the end of it, he just commands, like, Lazarus, get out here. Lazarus come in. And Lazarus, it's, the way he says he comes out and he's bound hand and foot and he says, loose him. So it's almost as if the words of Christ not only raised Lazarus from the dead, but like sucked him to the front of the tomb because he's bound, in a burial shroud. He can't walk, but somehow like he's there, So this is like, and these people saw this and they were like, whoa, this is big, this is unbelievable. And then what happens, and it's really astounding. And this is the reason I think you have to start Passion Week here, is because Jesus comes right up to the hornet's nest and he stirs it and he knows. And again, I think that anger, that he's angry at sin, death, Satan, hell, the grave. And he's like, let's do this. And he raises Lazarus and he does it with command and authority. Like, get out here, and everybody sees. And then you have this sort of last, couple of paragraphs in the chapter. And basically what happens, I'll just summarize it, is, again, because there's always got to be a few people that, no matter what you're doing, are a critic. So a few people run back to the scribes and the Pharisees in Jerusalem, and the priests, and they're like, hey, Jesus showed up and he did this. And they're like, what? And they run out there and they have a meeting. And they're like, what are we going to do? And it kind of reads like this. It says, so the chief priests and the Pharisees convened in the Sanhedrin at the Sanhedrin and said, what are we going to do since this man does so many signs? If we let him continue in this way, everyone will believe in him. Then the Romans will come and remove both our place and our nation. I mean, get that. How evil are these guys? He's doing signs and wonders. He's doing miraculous things from God, and it might result in us losing our jobs. So let's kill him. You have to understand how evil these people are. I think I cannot parse this text in any way except for to say they actually knew. They knew he was the Messiah, but they didn't want the Messiah on those terms. And they're like, let's just kill him. I don't want to do this. And so they're like, what are we going to do? And then they make a decision. So Caiaphas speaks up and he says, you know nothing at all. You're not considering that it is to your advantage that one man should die for the people rather than the whole nation should perish. So in a way, he's right. But he's like, yeah, it's better that one man dies than that. And so it says that they decided on that day that they were going to kill him. And it says, therefore, Jesus no longer walked openly among the Jews, but departed from there to the countryside near the wilderness to a town called Ephraim, and he stayed there with the disciples. So because of this moment, the Sanhedrin, the Jewish power structure, decides we're going to kill him. Jesus withdraws, and the chapter ends like this. It says, the Jewish Passover was near, and many went up to Jerusalem from the country to purify themselves before the Passover. They were looking for Jesus and asking one another as they stood in the temple complex, what do you think? He won't come to the festival, will he? The chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, they should report it so they could arrest him. And so now the stage is set. The stage is set. Jesus is just off stage, waiting to show up. The scribes, priests, Pharisees have given the orders. If you see him, we're going to arrest him. We're going to kill him. The people in Jerusalem, the crowds for the Passover are already pouring in. You know, the tens, the hundreds of thousands of people are already pouring in. Everyone knows. See, like sometimes I think we think, you know, because Hollywood can only afford a couple hundred or a couple thousand, you know, extras, that these were fairly small events. This was big time. Hundreds of thousands of people knew what was going on. Okay, this was like CNN, Fox News, world event, headliner, and everyone is gathering every day, and they're in the temple because the temple is going to be the center stage for the fight. They're in the temple, and is he going to come? Is he going to come? Is he going to show? What do you think? No way he's going to come. They'll kill him. And they're having this conversation. They're watching the Mount of Olives above. Is he going to show up? And that's what sets the stage for triumphal entry, where he does show up. Where he and to me, and we'll talk more about this on that episode, the triumphal entry, you know, in my overly creative imagination, it's like a boxer coming into the ring. You know, it's you know, I mean, when I grew up, you know, Mike Tyson was a big deal. You know,
bro, yeah,
just like
he still is a big
deal. You know, when they the music and everything, and they come in like I don't, you know. That's probably a little bit sacrilegious, I don't know. But I just view Jesus coming down the hill. Satan and his forces are already in the ring, ready to go, and he's like, "Let's do this. Let's get it on." And for a week, they just do battle, you know, resulting in eventually his death and resurrection. So that's why I think it's the stage setter.
I mean, this is really cool. I don't think I've heard this explained this way. I mean, I've heard this in lots of context for the resurrection and this being that initial picture of the resurrection and painting that picture. But the amount of foreshadowing and thinking about the way that we're putting this here at the beginning of Passion Week is pretty amazing. And the way you just explained it, Jesus stepping in, doing this, and with all these other tensions and all these other narratives that are starting to build, and even setting up that triumphal entry, it's pretty amazing. It would be a great opening scene for a film.
It would, right?
I feel that right now.
Well, I think sometimes we are Bible disjointedly, like we just read chapter and chapter, and we don't ever sit down and read chapters at a time. And
we don't get the meta narratives that are there.
Right. So and there's validity in both, right? Because sometimes there's like incredibly intensely deep meaning in like a sentence or two. But then also sometimes there's meaning in what plays out over the course of multiple chapters, and there's patterns there. And so there's real value in diving really deep and focusing on just a small chunk of text. But then also sometimes, it's really good to just sit down and read the whole thing, you know, read 6 or 8 chapters, you know, so you can see how things play out, you know, in a context. And you know, what you see in John's narrative is that they already kind of want to kill him. He does this, and they know we're going to kill him. And Jesus isn't dumb. He's really smart. He understands the political forces, and he knows that by raising Lazarus right there, that he is, you know, he is starting a big fight. You know, he gets it. And again, I think that's a part of, again, why is he angry? Because he knows all that. He knows that I'm going to raise someone from the dead, and it's going to make somebody mad. That's so unjust. That's so evil. That's so wrong, you know? And so there's all these things that are playing out, and that's why he has that response, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. And, I think maybe we can touch on what we learn from the places and the land and the proximity. And, it's funny you said, like, we read these in individual stories, but then there's also just read it continuously. Well, the chapters don't help us do that.
And that was done later.
I know,
like John didn't do that. That was done by priests later, and they're helpful.
And we've heard that, but it's like, it does make you feel, it does kind of almost compartmentalize things unnecessarily, where you're like, oh, chapter's done, next chapter. And then we're starting a new something, but really it flows straight. This should flow straight through and connect it. So, what can we learn from the land here as we wrap this up, as we're teeing up where we're going next?
Yeah. I think the big, again, the way the land informs the story, I think I've already said it, really is just the fact that, if you don't know that Bethany is literally right next door, and if you don't know, if you haven't read the text and sort of picked up on the pattern, that Jesus never really stays in Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. He always stays in Bethany. That's his home base, when he's doing ministry in Jerusalem or when he's attending the festivals, which he's required to. So that's, helps you understand his relationship with, Mary, Martha, Lazarus, that he's a frequent house guest of theirs, So I think that's sort of the main thing, just understanding the proximity where it was, and why it would be provocative to do this miracle there.
Well, that's great. I think that's a great start to this series on Passion Week. So where are we going next?
Well, we're just going to follow it chronologically.
Okay.
So next we'll look at the triumphal entry.
Okay.
And what's going on there with a mob of people that are saying Hosanna, Hosanna, and 5 days later are saying crucify him, crucify him. Like, what's going on with these people? Yeah. What are they thinking? What's the context of all that? So that's going to be our primary focus next week.
Awesome.
Next episode, I guess.
Sounds good. All right. Well, we'll see you guys at the next episode.
Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, click like and subscribe. It really helps us. And if you really enjoyed it, go on over to our website, thelandofthebible.com, and become a supporter. It helps us generate more content and gives you access to our full library of video and Bible study content.